Hey there, it's Jared from Authentic Soundware, and this video is going to tell you everything you need to know about the Jazz Anthology Drums pattern maker. You'll notice that I'm using the word maker. The point of this thing is really to help you make your own content, but to be able to make it more quickly and easily, and to have the results have a better rhythmic feel and swing to them. So the library content is included more just to get you started, and then the idea is that you can take it from there. So here we have what looks like a pretty standard drum step sequencer like you might see on, a drum machine. But there's one key exception. This sequencer plays back the pattern with an authentic rhythmic feel. If you've ever tried to sequence jazz drums in your DAW and get them to swing using the, the little swing percentage thing in the quantize menu, you know that thing doesn't really work at all. So that's where this comes in. There's a menu of rhythmic feels based on real performances at specific tempos, and the feels can be mapped onto any pattern that you create in the step sequencer. And then the result can be dragged to the timeline of your DAW where you can develop the idea further. So it's a lot more flexible and creative than just getting a library of MIDI files for you to mix and match together. And since all the patterns can be paired with different rhythmic feels, it multiplies all the options substantially. So let me give you a quick demo of how this works. I have a little basic jazz ride cymbal swing pattern loaded up on the sequencer here, and I've got my feel currently set to quantized eighth notes, which is exactly what that sounds like. It's just quantized eighth notes. So if I play this for you, let's hear how it sounds. I'm going to use the keys up here. We're on pattern 1, so the C6 here will play back this pattern. Okay, quantized eighth notes. So let's go to the feel menu, and I'm going to go to this one called Easy Swing. It's at a native tempo of 120 BPM, which is what the tempo of my DAW currently is, so this should work well. So let's hear that. So that's sounding a lot better, right? That's because this is a rhythmic feel where the timing of every note is unique and was played at a specific tempo by a real drummer. It's not the result of just applying a mathematical formula to every note and having them all be the same, swing percentage. So the cool thing is that, say I change my mind and I don't want to be working at 120. I want to make this a really up-tempo thing, but I don't want to have to make a new sequence. So I can turn external off just to sort of freewheel the tempo here in Contact. And I'm going to set my tempo way, way fast. I'm going to go to 320. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, that sounds totally ridiculous, right? It sounded good at 120, but it's not sounding good now. And that's kind of to be expected. Real jazz musicians usually straighten out their swing feel as the tempo increases. So that timing that was working well at 120 is not going to work well at 320. So let's find one that is appropriate for this tempo. And I'm going to go in here, and there's one called Modern Up. So let's listen to that. Okay, that's a lot better. Now, why don't we try something in the medium range? I'm going to set the tempo to, let's say, 180. And we'll go into the feels list and let's pull up. Okay, this is 185, close enough. We'll do medium swing 3. So you get the idea. These feels at different tempos take the pain out of having to nudge the notes around to try and get something that's really swinging at your tempo and just feel way better than a coarse sort of swing percentage approach. And we're using the same sequence that we've already made in all kinds of different contexts without having to start over every time. So now let's go back to 120, and I'm going to reset this. I'll just turn external back on. So now we're syncing to the host tempo. We've gone back to easy swing, and say I'm happy with this. Remember? So say I'm happy with the way this is feeling. I maybe want to throw it in my DAW, loop it a bunch of times, and start writing something against it. I'm going to come down here, click render slot. That little warning symbol went away. I drag it out into the timeline, and here it is. I could copy and paste it. I could change the velocity. I could move it all around. So that's really how easy it is. I'll go a bit more into detail on this feature a bit later. But for now, let's just say maybe I want to just create a quick variation on this. I'm just going to add, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a cross stick just on beat 4, kind of like a Philly Joe Jones. So now I have a little variation. I'm going to hit render slot again, drag it out, and now we have that second one. I could take that off. I could make this back to a snare, add a little fill. Okay, and now we have a third version. Render, drag, and we're building up our song easily as we go. So that's the basic overview. Now let's go dive into some of the details. I'd like to just give a broad overview of the structure of what's going on with this pattern maker. We've already seen the step sequencer in action, but there are actually 12 pattern slots, which can each hold a unique pattern. The active feel up here is a global setting for all the pattern slots. So you can't have one feel for each slot. They're all sharing the same one. You can select any of the 12 pattern slots for editing by clicking on one of these buttons. And then the notes starting on C6 here correspond to these slots. So if you play one of these notes, it'll flip you to the pattern in the sequencer that matches. So C sharp, etc. Patterns can be loaded, saved, initialized, copied, and pasted using the controls in this operations panel here. And then there's something called a scene, which is sort of like a meta preset that represents the complete state of the pattern maker. So it includes all the patterns and all the different slots and the active feel. The scenes can be loaded, saved, and initialized using this scene operations panel on the left side. Okay, so now let's talk about using the step sequencer. I'm going to just demonstrate some of the basic editing functionality. I'm going to start by clicking the Init button in this pattern operations button, and that's going to reset all the steps in this pattern to inactive. So you'll notice that the step sequencer has 8 lanes or parts, and each part has a sound from the drum set assigned to it. When I clicked Init, they were all reset to their default. Something to know is that not every sound from the kit is available here. It's only the most common ones, and also only sounds that that can work in this kind of context. For example, things like rolls and flams, the roughs and the ballad brush sweeps won't work well in a step sequencer, so they're not available here to choose from. I'm just going to leave these all as the defaults for now. So let's talk about the note editing. There are a couple ways to add notes to the step sequencer, but the most basic way is to just click on one of the dots to make it active. Black means off or inactive, and blue means on. Each sound from the parts menu has been pre-assigned by me a duration for it. So you don't have to worry about setting the duration. You can just pick a sound and start adding steps. So when I click on one of the dots, it's automatically assigned a velocity, which is displayed in the step velocity table here. So each bar here represents the velocity of the step in this lane that we're looking at. And the velocity, which is automatically assigned, is defined by this knob here, this def. So if I have this set to 70, every note I create will be assigned a velocity of 70. But to add a little variety, there's also this randomize knob. So you can randomize that default for each step by up to plus or minus 10. So if I start adding notes, you'll see they're all around the same, but they're being randomized slightly. To turn a note off, you just click on it and it goes away. You can, of course, just adjust the velocity afterwards by pulling on these bars, and you can just drag them all the way down to 0, and that'll turn the note off. You can also sort of draw them in more than one at a time. Now, the nudge buttons over here will nudge the velocity of all the notes in the current lane up or down by a value of 5. See, like this? So this can be pretty handy because I'm changing the velocities overall, but I'm keeping the relationship between them consistent. If I want to fine tune it, I can hold down Shift and it'll only nudge by 1 instead of by 5 for some fine adjustment. You can clear all the notes in a lane by holding Option and clicking on one of the active notes. Or you can hold Option and click on an inactive step, and it'll fill the entire lane with new steps based on the velocity settings. If I randomize this a lot, you'll see the variety in the velocities of all the steps. You can tell which lane is active for editing in the step velocity editor because it will have these little red lines around it, and then the menu turns white. When you add a new step to a lane that's not currently the lane that's in focus, its lane is automatically selected and set as the active lane in the velocity editor up here. So I can quickly just hop around, change something, add a note here, and just I'm just trying to make it as fast and easy as possible. A pattern from scratch. And I'm going to start with a simple example using the rhythmic feel that we already have loaded up. I'm going to hit init here again to just erase all that clicking I was doing. And I'm going to set the default velocity to, let's say, 90-ish. I'll set this down here somewhere reasonable, like maybe 3. Doesn't really matter. And now I'll go ahead and I'm going to go to the ride cymbal tip lane. And now I'll just go ahead and add a basic swing pattern on the ride. So it's going to be like ting, 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 walk the dog, walk the, and then we're back to the top, the dog. Okay, so let's hear how that sounds. I'm going to play an E6 because I just noticed I'm actually on pattern 5 by accident, not pattern slot 1. So I'll play the E. Okay, that's our ride cymbal. So maybe I'll just add a hi-hat, pedal stomp on 2 and 4. So that's 2, 4, 2, 4. And maybe I'll just go and assign this to acrostic and put that on beat 4 of each 2 bars. All right, so maybe I'll just nudge those down a bit. All right, so say this is good. I want to drag it to the timeline in my DAW. Notice this red exclamation point in the drag to host zone. That means that I've made some changes, and the contents of the contact MIDI buffer probably don't accurately reflect the current state of things with the changes I've made. So I need to click render slot to update it. The warning goes away and I'm good to drag it out. Looking at these boxes up here and wondering what's going on with that. There's one that says feel info and the other one says pattern setup. So what are these all about? So every feel has an original tempo and a meter. And it also has something called a time base associated with it. The tempo and meter, that's pretty self-explanatory. Time base refers to the rhythmic value of each step. So if the time base is eighth notes, it means that each one of the steps down here represents an eighth note. See, these steps are just an abstract list of steps. They don't have any musical timing associated with them until they're paired with a feel and then played back. So if I change the feel to one that's not eighth note based like this, but rather one that's triplet based, say we go in here and we pick the one called here, Easy Elvin, you'll see I'm going to get a warning up here. It's saying, it's telling me you set your pattern up as eighth notes, but when it plays back, the feel is going to treat each step as an eighth note triplet, not a regular eighth note. It will still play back, but it's probably not going to sound like you're expecting it to. So let's experiment with this. I'm going to initialize the pattern again. I'm going to go back to the correct slot when I do this time. I'm going to leave the feel, the active feel set to this new triplet based one, and I'm going to change the time base of the pattern to match the feel. So let's put it to 8 triplets. So you'll see that warning went away, and the position of these grid lines changed. Now we have 3 steps per beat, like these lines represent a beat. If I switch to 16th notes, it's 4 steps per beat. If I go back to 8ths, it's only 2 steps per beat. So we're going to go to triplets. Okay, so that's matching the time base of the feel, but we have this odd extra beat here at the end. That doesn't look right. So here's the thing. Each pattern slot has a maximum of 16 steps, which are divided by the time base. And typically you'll want to set the pattern length so it's like a multiple of the time base and the meter. That sounds like a lot of math, but what I mean is that, for instance, in this case, in 4/4, 4 beats of triplets, or 4 beats of 3 steps, would be 12 steps in total. So we want to put this at 12 instead of 16. And now we have what looks like a nice 4-beat, 4/4 pattern where each beat has 3 steps representing the triplets. If we were in 3/4, it would be 3 times 3 would be 9 steps. If we were in 5/4, I'd set it to 15 steps for 5 beats of 3 triplets. So again, you don't need to change this, but almost always you should. Now be aware that if you're working with a triplet or a 16th based feel and you match your pattern length like we did here, you'll see that your pattern will only be 1 bar long. If you're working with an 8th note feel, you'd probably leave the pattern length set to 16 the way we had it before, and then you'd have a full 2 bars long. And the 8th note feels are a full 2 bars long, and they're not constructed, as 1 bar that repeats. So you get some extra variety in the rhythmic timing for an 8th note based feel. Okay, so now we're set up. I'm going to build my pattern the way I did before, knowing that this is a triplet feel. So in a triplet feel, I'd be like, ding, 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 walk the dog. Okay, and I'll put my hi-hat on 2 and 4, and I had a cross stick on 4. Okay, so I'm going to, now then the feel for this really wants to be at 135, so why don't we set it to 135 so it feels nice. Okay, let's hear it. So that's an explanation of how the pattern length and the time base relate to the attributes of the feels. Now there's a shortcut to set this up, which is to just open up one of the factory scenes. If you recall, earlier I described how a scene is sort of a meta preset that stores all the settings of the pattern maker. Well, if you open up one of the factory scenes by going to load and choosing one, it will recall the pre-configured settings that have the feel and the pattern length and the time base all set up and ready to go. So that's a good shortcut to get up and running a little bit quicker. Okay, so let's imagine you've made some cool patterns and you've got them working with the rhythmic feel you want. And now, how do you get them into your DAW? Of course, you could just play them back as loops using the playback keys. These keys up on C6, you could just hold those notes down and record them the way many libraries have you hold down a key to loop something. That would work. But I kind of pictured those more as intended just for auditioning the patterns as you work with them. I'd really recommend exporting the finished pattern as MIDI, and it's really quite easy to do. If you look down here at the MIDI export panel, as I showed before, you'll see there's this red exclamation mark in the drag to host area. That means that I've made some changes and the MIDI buffer doesn't accurately reflect the current state of things. It could be that I just changed one note or one velocity, or it might be something like I changed the feel or the pattern length, or I just loaded a new scene. Whatever it was, I need to update the MIDI buffer to the current state before exporting the MIDI. To do that, there's two different buttons. There's render slot and render scene. So render slot takes the contents of the current slot, whichever one you've selected, and copies it to the contact MIDI buffer, but now with the timings of the rhythmic feel applied to it. So remember, until we do this, these patterns are just like abstract steps with no particular timing to them. They're not music. That's why they can be reused in the way that a MIDI file can't. So when we're ready, we need to bake the timing in, and that's what the render button does. So after rendering, you'll see that red mark goes away, and it can be dragged out. You can drag it to the timeline of your DAW. You could also drag it to a notation program or just to the desktop of your computer. You're making your own MIDI files. Render scene is essentially the same, except that it renders all the slots back to back as one long file. So if I click that and drag it out, it's going to be much longer because it'll just go as far as you have content. It'll stop, if this next one doesn't have anything, you'll notice it doesn't put a bunch of empty space. It's up to you which method works best for you, but I do think it's best to just do it slot by slot, because then you get, if I flip to clips view in Pro Tools here, because then you get nice little clips that you can move around like little Lego blocks, and you can just build up your sequence. But, either way is fine. Now, remember, if I change something now, like I just add a step, you'll see that little red warning indicator came back on. It means that, that the render we did a moment ago is now out of date. So we just click render again, and we'd be ready to drag it out. Okay, you can load a new scene by clicking here and then navigating through the file browser to find the scene you want to load. The factory scenes are organized by meter, and in the case of 4.4, sort of subcategorized by the Timebase. Loading a new scene will completely erase and replace all the pattern slots with whatever's in the saved file, and then it'll set the feel to what was saved with the scene. So like I said earlier, loading up one of the scenes can be a great way to get started quickly. And then if you want to save a scene after you've changed it, simply click here, give the scene a new name, and be aware that for some reason, Kontakt doesn't check if a file by that name already exists at the location. So any existing file with the same name will be overwritten. So just be careful to give it a new name. If you click the Init button, this will initialize all the pattern slots to default, but it leaves the active feel as it is. So you might possibly need to reconfigure your pattern setup, since the default pattern time base is eighth notes. In this case, we now have a mismatch. Clicking the Load Pattern button in the Pattern Operations panel will allow you to load save pattern into the currently selected slot. So I'm looking at slot 3 right now. That's where the pattern is going to be loaded. But there's a quick tip. You don't have to close this dialog box to change the destination slot. So say I loaded in slot 3. and then I just wanted to maybe load another one over here, and then load another one over there, and build up a new scene, I can just do that all as sort of one process. The other thing is that the patterns load almost instantaneously, and they're available to play in Audition right away. So if I load something into pattern slot 1 and I play the C, okay, maybe that's not quite right. What's number 6? We'll hear that. No, that's too busy. Go to this one. Okay, maybe that's just right. Then I'll go to slot 2, find something else, load that in, and I can continue that, until I've got everything I want. Saving a pattern is pretty easy. You just click save and give it a name. And just again, remember that in Kontakt, it's possible to overwrite a file that has the same file name, so be careful. As you saw earlier, you can initialize the pattern with the init button. This is going to clear all the steps in the pattern slot, and it will also reset all the part sound assignments to the defaults and set the pattern setup parameters to the defaults as well, which are 16 and 8th notes for the Timebase. You can copy a pattern. Let me just make a little thing here. You can copy a pattern to another slot using these copy and paste buttons. And this can be a great way to quickly just build up a scene. You could take this, copy it to another scene, or another slot, and then maybe add another note. I could go to the next slot, quickly build up some variations, and so on until you've built up a whole custom scene. Then export the thing, and Bob's your uncle. So that's the rundown on the pattern maker. It's a lot to take in, but I think it's something that once you start messing around with it, you'll be up and running in no time. Just set your pattern setup to match the feel, and you'll probably be off the races. But if you have any trouble whatsoever, please don't hesitate to email me through the website. I answer all the questions personally, and I'd be more than happy to help you. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.